나소 다데 드린딜리아다 아주디 라옹로즈베디 다니마 소시니마 시바르 차데요.
Today is the fourth day of our spring teachings, the Arya Chama spring teachings. There are many of you listening over the web, but the main students are the nuns who are attending the Arya Chama spring teachings. And there are also many of you monastic and lay people listening over the internet. And I'd like to offer my warm greetings to all of you. I would like to continue teaching on the 50 verses on the Guru. Please wait a moment or two. I need to share my screen. Now, here our outline here has become a little bit mixed up. I wasn't really able to decide which to use, but I'm using, the other day I used it, primarily I used Chopak's commentary because it was easy. And so he says that the first section is the introductory section, the main text, and then the concluding section. So he divides it into these three main topics. And so here, when we're speaking about it in those terms, the first is the introductory sections that are related to the composition. And this has two parts, the homage and the pledge to compose. So first is the homage. And so this reads, I bow down as is proper at the lotus feet of the Guru, who is the cause of reaching the state of glorious Vajrasattva. This is the homage. Now, when we describe the meaning of this homage, the other day I spoke about this according to the Sanskrit commentary. As I mentioned, there is a Sanskrit commentary. And so I have already explained the words according to how it's described in that commentary. And so now today, I would like to describe these two words as they are explained in the commentaries of the Tibetan tradition on the 50 verses, and particularly the oldest ones. One of the oldest one is the commentary by Jesandapa Gyaltsen. So to take that as the explanation as the basis, I think that there are a particular explanation. I think there are some profound points that are different than in any other commentary. And so to explain it according to this, so here when we say glorious, what that means is that they possess the glory because they have non-dual wisdom. This is what Jesandapa Gyaltsen says. Glorious means that they possess glory because they have non-dual wisdom. And so when you say, what do you mean by non-dual wisdom? That means Vajra and Sattva. So Vajra means emptiness, and Sattva means non-reverential great compassion. So the indivisible emptiness and great compassion that's like the wisdom of inseparable emptiness and compassion, the Vajra-like samadhi. So this is the Vajra-like samadhi. And then the state is the level where this Vajra-like samadhi has become manifest. It is the level where it is manifest. So the cause for achieving this wisdom and of inseparable emptiness and compassion, the Vajra Samadhi, is primarily is following the exalted Guru, receiving the instructions from them, and then practicing the path. And by doing this, then we can manifest the Vajra-like Samadhi. This primarily comes from following the Guru and following their instructions. So achieving that unexcelled state of the Vajrasattva depends upon the Guru. So you pay to the lowest part of the Guru's body, which are their feet. And so you prostrate at the lotus feet of the Guru. Now here it says, I bow down as is proper. We prostrate to the Guru who is worthy of prostration. So an individual such as Bhavila who is worthy of paying homage. The way that you predestined means with the respect of your body, speech, and mind. So speaking respectfully with your body, speech, and mind. And so that is the explanation by Jetsun Drapa Gyaltsen. So following that, we have the most well-known commentary on the 50 verses in Tibetan is Tsongkhapa's commentary. To explain this according to his commentary, when he says, I bow down as a proper at the lotus feet of the Guru, who is the cause of reaching the state of glorious Vajrasattva. So we're saying bowing, so who are we bowing to? So what are we prostrating? What are we prostrating to? It is the lotus feet of the Guru that we're prostrating to. The Guru's feet themselves are compared to a lotus, or it's like the metaphor of the lotus. As I explained before, the Guru's feet are the lowest part of their body. So the person who's paying the homage, the author of the text, Master Bhavila, is bending the highest part of his body, his head, down to the lowest part of the Guru's body, with the top of his head. And so because he's bowing down like this, it's showing that he has extremely deep respect. It's a very respectful way. It's a very respectful prostration. So how do we pray? It says, as is proper. So bowing down as is proper here means bowing respectfully to the Guru with the body, with the three gates, with your body, speech, and mind, not just in words, but actually using your body, speech, and mind all together to the Guru. And the way that you prostrate is as described in the scriptures. So there are the ways to pay respect to the Guru and to show your respect to Guru that are described in the tantras and the text. And so this is in accord with that. So in accord with the scriptures, this is the way that he is bowing down to the Guru. And so who are they bowing to? What is the Guru or that is worthy of these prostrations? And so in order to the words that tell us what the Guru is like, it says who is the cause of reaching the state of glorious Vajrasattva. This is the Guru. They say the cause of reaching the state of glorious Vajrasattva. What it says in the 7th chapter of the first of the 2 books of Evajra is, glorious is non-dual wisdom. In any case, the word pal is the Sanskrit word Shri, so glorious means Shri. And this is the root cause of achieving the state or level of Guru who possesses the glory of non-dual wisdom. The main cause of the root cause of achieving the state of level of Vajrasattva that we need to achieve is the Guru, and that's whom we prostrate to. And so this is described in the 16 beings of the Vajra Pinnacle Tantra, which says, why are they Vajrasattva? It is the wisdom of supreme enlightenment. It is called a Vajra. As he arises from the wisdom Vajra, he is called Vajrasattva. So as this says, the wisdom that dwells, the Dharmakaya that dwells inseparably from suchness is the Vajra, and the form kayas that rise are the Sattva. So the Vajra means the Dharmakaya, and Sattva refers to the two form kayas. And so in this way, this is the Vajrasattva has these two kayas, the Dharma and form kayas inseparably. So this is the state. So the primary cause, what is indispensable for achieving this level, the thing that if you have it, you can do it. If you don't have it, do it. This primary cause is the glorious Guru. So for that reason, the main cause for achieving the state of Vajrasattva, the state of achieving the unification of the two kayas, the state of Vajrasattva, is the following the Guru. So this teaches the homage. And so following this, we have the pledge to compose. But actually before that, we have this. So here we have the Sanskrit, Tibetan, Chinese, and English showing each of these words. We can look at each of them in the set. But it will take a lot of time to go through this, so I don't need to explain that. So next is the pledge to compose. This pledge to compose has the Sanskrit, following them has been described in many stainless tantras. I'll summarize it in brief. Listen respectfully to this. So below the Tibetan, there is the translation by the Sung Dynasty translator Ravi Kirti. Then after that is translated from the Ming Domsrid from the time of the Kuomintang. This is a translation that's translated from the Tibetan into Chinese. And the reason for this is that we're primarily speaking according to the Tibetan if we explain it. And the Ravi Kirti is translated from the Sanskrit. So if we explain it, so it's difficult to go through all the explanation according to that Chinese translation. But in the case, the Tongshangyi translation is translated from Tibetan into Chinese. And so that's the primary Chinese translation that we'll use, because the main explanation that we're giving is now according to the Tibetan. So for this reason, I'm presenting the two. And then below that is the English translation. And so here's this. This is showing the Sanskrit, Tibetan, Chinese, and English. Now, as I said before, there is the Sanskrit commentary, the difficult commentary and the difficult points of following the Guru. And it says, after prostrating at the Guru's lotus feet, what will you do? It says, so if you've said, I'm bowing to the lowest part of the Guru, to the lotus feet of the Guru. So once you've prostrated to them, then what do you do? So what is the work that you're going to do? What is the task you're going to do after prostrating? And so it is as it says, following them has been described in many stainless tantras. I'll summarize it in brief. Listen respectfully to this. So stainless here means pure and faultless. So it is pure and it has no faults. It's showing that it's utterly pure and that there's no flaws. And another way we explain stainless is that we can say that then stainless in general means that you have that it's clean and no faults. So that's one thing that it means. And another aspect in this context, you can say that they have no stains of non-virtue. They have no stains of non-virtue. That's how we should understand it here. And so in this case, when we say stainless, the reason why we have to say this is because in this context, we have to say that the author of the 50 verses to the Guru himself, when he was writing this cause, did he just write it down, everything he thought of, and just make it up? Or did he write it down other sources as they were? Is it something that he made up or projected? It says it's described in many tantras. So described in many great tantras, and he took the main points and the essential points from these and compiled them. And so for this reason, it says, as described in many stainless tantras. And so this is saying that the author of these 50 verses did not write it by making out of himself whatever he thought of. Instead, it's what it was taught by the teacher of Vajradhara in the tantras, and he took the essence of what was taught and he'd compiled it all here. Then we have the word tantras. We have the word Bahut Tantra Gita. So we have the word tantra here is a word that we need to explain. So tantra means, as according to the Indian commentary, tantra means continuous. And here, in this context, they're classified in three, according to the cause and so forth: the causal tantra, the resultant tantra, and the tantra of means. And so he says it's taught in terms of these three different ways in the Indian commentary. Please wait a moment. So in this context, tantra means continuous, and your tantras, and you have the causal tantras, the resultant tantras, and the tantras of means. And so in this way, there are three different types of tantras. And so when you talk about the causal tantras, then we said the different types of families that are in the beings within the continuum of all sentient beings. Likewise, because of the result of these common tantras, there are the resultant tantras of the classifications of great Vajradhara that come from the differences in family. And then in order to that the cause produce the result, there are the conditions such as mantra, mudra, and mandalas. And so these are the tantra of means. So in general, with the tantra, we have these. Think about it, the main times we talk about them in terms of Kriya Tantra, Charya Tantra, Yoga Tantra, Highest Tantra, and unexcelled tantras. There are these many different types of tantras, but here, the main point that's explained in these tantras of secret mantra, when we say in many stainless tantras, that we're saying the different ways of serving the guru that are described in the many different tantras. It's taking the words that tell us what are the proper ways, what are the incorrect ways of serving the guru. And so because it's described and explaining in these them in these ways, it says that are taught in many stainless tantras. Now here there is a a doubt that we might have. If, as you're saying, the Bhagavan taught all of these tantras and he wrote all of this, and if he's said all of this already, so then for you to repeat him and write this all again, there's no point to that. If the teacher of Vajradhara has already taught them, just show us the text that he's teaching, there's no point for you to write it again. And in order to dispel this doubt, what the commentary says is, to explain it, says, I shall summarize it in brief. Says, I'll summarize in brief. So he says, I'll summarize in brief in order to dispel that doubt. This is what this phrase comes from. And the reason that this is there is that in general the teacher of Vajradhara taught the unmistaken way to follow the Guru in many different tantras, and also he also taught what is the mistaken way. But there's so many different tantras. If you have to read all of them, you can't. So people get afraid of it. You're just unable to read them all. So many people just don't have that. They don't have the time to read it. And it's difficult for them to read it. And so for that reason, we often explain it in this way. Like there's the story we often tell. The story goes that when Atisha, when he was made the abbot of Vikramashila, he became like the main master at Vikramashila. And at that time in Vikramashila, it was like the source of the Vajrayana in India, and many of the teachings on Vajrayana were transmitted through the masters who studied at Vikramashila. And so within this monastery of Vikramashila, there were many texts on the secret mantra of Vajrayana. There are so many different tantric texts in their library. So Atisha himself said he thought to himself that there was probably no secret mantra tantra that he hadn't read. And he had this sort of a confidence that this was so. He had this confidence that he'd read them all. And so once in his dream, he saw Tara. Have you ever read this or that tantra, she asked. And he said, forget about reading the text. He said, I'd probably never even heard of the text. And he said, somebody said this, and Tara said. So when you think to yourself that, so don't you have the pride of thinking that there's no tantric text that you haven't read? And she said, but you don't know them all, right? And so when I mentioned this and that tantra to you, I just told you the titles of a few tantras, right? And you said that you haven't even read them. You forgot about reading them. You haven't even heard of them. So by saying this, it kind of is decreased his pride a fair amount. So this is the story. And likewise, he also went to Tibet. So later, when he went to Tibet, at that time in Tibet, there was a Samye monastery. So he first went to Tu, and then he went down to Uzang. And when he got to Uzang, he went to this Samye. It was the most famous monastery in that region. So that's Samye. There is a large library that dated back to the time of the Tibetan emperors, and among that there are many Sanskrit manuscripts about the secret mantra. There are quite a few texts on the secret mantra of Vajrayana. When he's reading these texts on the tantras of secret mantra, He said there must be no end at all to the tantras of the secret mantra. I thought in Tibet that I'd seen all the texts that there were in India. I've seen so many different Sanskrit texts. These were Indian texts. These are in India texts that he'd seen. There's so many texts here that I've never seen before. And so he copied some of them, recopied the Sanskrit manuscript and sent it back down to India. And so if Atisha himself is such a great scholar of the secret mantra Vajrayana, and that's a time when the teachings were there to a fair extent in India. He came from Vikramashila, and there were so many tantric texts there. And he had the opportunity to read all of these texts. He had the time and opportunity to read them. So if there's someone who had had that opportunity, like Atisha, who was unable to, if it was like that for him, then there are so many texts that he hadn't read. Then so what it's like for us. So in this way, it's far more difficult for us to read all the secret mantra tantras. And so in order to benefit ordinary beings, and so there's some that are taught only partially in one in Tantra, but not incomplete. And in others, now there are some that are missing or extras. So that because of that. And so for that reason, he read all of the Tantras and he took the actual essence of all of these and he combined them all in one and to teach this. And so this is, and so that he's saying this in order that we don't have the doubt that this is redundant and unnecessary. In the end, it says that listen respectfully to this. When he says listen respectfully to this, and this means if you under all the sentient beings have the fortune, it says at this point, I'm going to explain this. I've read these different stainless tantras. I've taken the points and I've summarized the main points on following the guru without mistake. So I'm teaching them all here. So all you fortunate students listen with respect. And he says, listen respectfully. And the main point that's here is when we think about the different, we often talk about the three faults of the vessel. When you're listening to the Dharma, we talk about the three faults of the vessel. And so here, the Sanskrit commentary, the difficult points of following the guru are described here clearly. These are the three faults of the vessel being upside down or unclean or leaky. And so it's saying, listen without these faults and listen respectfully. It's like they're the three faults of a vessel that we always speak about, right? When we teach the Dharma, many Dharmas speak about the three faults of a vessel. And that we need to listen in a way that is free of these six faults. And so if you need to say the source for talking about the three faults of this, then they are mentioned in this difficult commentary on the difficult points of serving the guru. And so that is the explanation as taking the Sanskrit commentary as a basis. Next, to explain it according to Jetsun Drapa Gyaltsen's commentary, so following them here, the way to following them means that I have followed one. So it says following them has been described in many stainless tantras, and so here. And so there are two different ways of describing this. So following them means that because of following one guru in this way, because of this, I've learned what the many stainless tantras say about the proper way to follow the guru. That's one of explaining them. Another way is showing that The methods for following Guru appear in many different tantras. That's another way to explain this. It's following the lineages. If you say which tantras they come from, it comes from the stainless ones. So there's not the tantras by the non-Buddhists. This is the Buddhas written by the Buddha, the ones that are taught by the teacher of Vajradhara. And so in this way, these are the stainless. It's the stainless words of the Buddha of Vajradhara. They're not free of the projections and denials of us ordinary sentient beings, but they're taught by the perfect Buddha of Vajradhara. So they're stainless. No one says in many stainless tantras. It says that they're taught in all tantras, of course, but primarily they mentioned there are 5 different tantras mentioned by Ajahn Japa Gyatso, as I described the other day. When he was describing the sutra, I said that when I was describing the 5 general points, when describing the 5 points, he said that he had 5 main tantras. And so within the commentary explains it says that there are 5. But when you count actually all of them, they actually follow 6. And what the 6 are, there are the Vairochana, then is the Vajrashesha, the second is a Yamantakasapa, there's a Guhyasamaja, and the 6th is the Vajrapanjara. So the ways to follow the Guru are taught in many different tantras. But he says, I'm going to summarize the meanings from all of this, and among them primarily these, and further the 5 or 6 tantras and that I mentioned before, that I will, so I take the main points and essence of all of these, and then without any redundancies. So like the idea that maybe it's unnecessary to teach what is taught in many tantras is, of course, it's said in the different tantras, but they're all scattered about the tantras, but to gather all of them and summarize them in brief, it's here. So this is it describes this in only 50 stanzas that contains all the essential points. So that is how Jesantapa Chalcedon describes it. So Jetsunga Pachempo, the great Jetsunga, says about this, the way that he describes it is by saying, it's basically the same. As a having bowed, what should we do? It says, so following them explained is the way to follow the Gurus. This is not mere words. You should listen with good respect as this encourages this listener. Regarding this topic of how to follow the Guru, the author himself, it's not just something he made up. It's not where he just put down everything he could think of. He didn't write down his every thought. In order to show that this is something we can have confidence, it says that his following has been described in many styles tantras. And so it's saying that he's summarizing this. If you ask what tantras it comes from, the tantras it was taught in are taught below. Basically, in his commentary on every shloka, Tsongkhapa himself writes down which tantra it comes from. Tantra takes each stanza of these, and he searched through all the tantras, and he gave the sources for each of these different tantras. And so in this way, Tsongkhapa is actually quite special, very different than any other. So if it's said in many different tantras, you might think, and if you read those tantras themselves, it'd be fine. So there's no reason for you to write this. Of course it is taught in many different tantras, but for one would think they're very long, or the order is mixed up, or they're scattered throughout the tantras. So I've just compiled them brief, and I've rearranged the order so that they're in the proper order, and I'll explain them. And so it's not that it's pointless or useless. And so that teaches the pledge to compose. And following this is the actual part of the text. And so this the topics from below here, I think it's best to use the topics according to Tsongkhapa. The other day, when I taught in Chinese, I used these topics according to Tsongkhapa. So I think it's probably best for me to just teach according to those, the order topics according to Tsongkhapa. So what it says in Drogin Shipak's outline is because it probably talks about the introductory points related to the composition, the actual main part of the composition, and the concluding parts of the composition. And so here, according to, if we compare this to compare if we combine this with Tsongkhapa's, then this is the presenting the explanation of the text itself, and it's talking about the way to present the guru, the time to explain the guru, and how to follow the guru. And when we come to the actual way to follow the guru, we have an overview of how to follow the guru and a detailed explanation. And the overnation has what is logical to venerate the guru, why we need to venerate the guru, why we need to consider the guru so important. And it has how to show respect. So the second one is how to show the respect, the ways that we should respect. And the third one is examining the one to be respected and the one who respects them. So what are the characteristics or qualifications that a guru should have, and so forth. So this is how it's described. And so today what we'll speak about is why it is logical to venerate the guru. What are the reasons why we should venerate the guru? And I don't need to read the Sanskrit here. I don't need to read all that. I'll read the Tibetan. I'll read the English. And the 3 times the Tathagatas who dwell in world realms in the 10 directions prostrate to Vajra masters who have received the supreme empowerment. We consider the guru, and the reason why we consider the guru so important and significant is taught here. Talk about the greatness of the guru, the greatness of the master, the reason why the master is important. This is taught here. And so first, to explain this according to the Sanskrit commentary in the Tenjura, the difficult points of following the guru. And I'll explain this in minutes. It's not so important to read every word of the Sanskrit commentary, but I'll just give you the main points and the meanings. So here, the way it's described in this is that when you talk about empowerment, so empowerment means abhishekra means, or empowerment means ablution, which is empowerment because it washes away the external stains of the body. So when you say supreme, what that means the foremost. In terms of being the cause of reaching the supreme result, it is the foremost of the supreme. So so supreme means the foremost because it is in terms of being the cause of reaching the supreme result. So when you put these two together in a supreme empowerment, that means an empowerment, and it's also supreme, so it's a supreme empowerment. What it means is that in terms of being a cause for achieving the unexcelled result, you can explain this in two different ways. And one of these explanations is that you can understand this as all empowerments. So, empowerment refers to all empowerments. Abhisheka refers to all empowerments because they're all a cause for achieving the supreme result. So it can refer to all the empowerments of the secret mantra Vajrayana. Another explanation is the explanation among empowerments. So it is, there are many different, you've got the vase, the secret and prajna and wisdom, and so forth, but the supreme or the pinnacle of them is the fourth empowerment, the world empowerment. So it should be understood as the fourth empowerment, the precious word empowerment. So when you talk about the Abhishekagra, the supreme empowerment, this should be can be understood either as all this empowerments of secret of mantra, or it can be referred to the fourth empowerment, the precious word empowerment. You say received here, this means that these Vajra masters of the secret mantra who are qualified have received this supreme empowerment. They have already received it, and they have those qualities. And because of this, the Buddha says, we have received the supreme empowerment. When we talk about the Vajracharya, means the Vajra master. And so there are two different ways that this is explained in the Sanskrit commentary. The first of these is when the Vajra means the discipline of Vajradhara. It's like the discipline of Vajradhara. Because they're engaging in that discipline, then they're Vajra master. That's because they're dwelling within the discipline of Vajradhara, so they're the Vajra master. So that's one explanation. Alternately, Vajra means the non-dual wisdom. It's like the inseparable wisdom and compassion. It is this non-dual wisdom that cannot be split or broken by any other thing. So it's similar to a Vajra. And because of this, it's called a Vajra. As they introduce students to this, to that non-dual wisdom and make them engage in the path for it, they lead the gurus, or they bring the students to that. So therefore, they are Vajra masters. And so this is another way of explaining Vajra masters. And this is saying that the non-dual wisdom means the Vajra, and master means is because they guide the students who are appropriate vessels to down this path. They bring them to this path, and they make them engage in it. And so therefore, they are Vajra masters. So there are these two different explanations of the Vajra master. I say the Tathagatas. When we say Tathagatas, we talk about this word. This is what we say all the time. There are two different ways to explain the word Tathagata, according to the Sanskrit commentary. One is that in all times, in all ways, and everything, they know everything knowable. They know this correctly. They know all phenomena in all times, in all ways, as if like a piece of fruit in the fruit of their palm, in the palm of their hand. They know how you should proceed down the path. And they have gone down that path, so therefore Deshan Shakpa or the Tathagatas, the thus gone. They have gone down the path, and so we need to follow that path down to enlightenment. They have followed this path to enlightenment, and they understand this, and they have gone down this, and so therefore they have gone down thus. That's one explanation of the word Tathagata. Another way of explaining it is that they speak exactly as appropriate according to the intentions of the students. Or they know what their family and what their time. And so they know what dharma they can teach those dharma that is appropriate to them. And because they know this, they can teach according to their own individuals' inclinations and capacities and their interests. Since they teach the Dharma according to that, and from that respect, they're called the Tathagata. In any case, Tathagata is another word for Buddha. So these are two different explanations of the word Tathagata. When you say in the 10 directions, so Dashtig means in the 10 directions. It means the four of east, south, west, and north. Then in addition to that, you have the northeast, southeast, southwest, and southeast, southwest, northwest, and northeast. These are the four intermediate directions. Then above you have the addition, you have the above and below. So you have the 10 directions. So there are directions, and there are 10 of them. So there are 10 directions. So the four of east, southwest, and north, plus the southeast, southwest, and so forth, and in total you end up with 10. And it says the world realms. So when you say the Lokadhatu means the world realms, this should be understood as the pure and impure realms of all the Buddhas. There are the pure realms, such as, for example, like Sukhavati, and there are the impure ones, such as this world. In any case, there are all the pure and impure realms. When you're saying who dwell in the world realms, then they're this means the Buddhas who dwell in the world realms in the 10 directions. So you've got all the world realms in the 10 directions and the 4 directions, the 4, the 8 intermediate, and the above and below. And you've got all the Buddhas who dwell in all these world realms. And it says in 3 times. So Trikalam. And so this means does not here, it doesn't here in this context, it does not mean the 3 times of past, present, and future. Instead, here it means morning, in the midday, and in the afternoon. So here, the 3 times means morning and afternoon, and then in the middle, midday. So you've got 3 times. It means that the Buddhas come and prostrate here. That in these 3 times, the Buddhas of the 10 directions actually come and they prostrate. And so this is what we say. We say they prostrate. And say that all the Buddhas of 3 times actually come and they prostrate. And so for that reason, we say that they prostrate or actually prostrate. And so the main point here is that all the gurus, all the Buddhas of the 10 directions from the come in the morning, and they come in the midday and the afternoon. They come in the 3 times to the Vajra master. And so even the Buddhas of the 10 directions prostrate to this. And so there's a doubt that comes up here. So generally, if you think about it, how it normally is, the guru, the master, and the Sikar Vajra, whether the guru or the Vajra master, whoever it is, then they should be. So someone that we should prostrate to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So why would the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, why do they prostrate to the guru? So why are they prostrating to the guru? The Buddhas are something, whether you're a guru or a student, as the guru, Buddhas are someone whom we should prostrate to. We should prostrate to them. It's not that they should prostrate to us. And so what is the reason for that? And so the Sanskrit commentary gives 2 reasons. So the guru or the master of the Sikar Vajra, we're going to take a qualified guru. We're not talking about just any Vajra master. We're talking taking a qualified master as the basis. They prostrate so why do all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions prostrate to them? There are 2 reasons. The first is that the guru is the body of Vajradhara. The qualified guru is inseparable from Vajradhara. So he's like the body of Vajradhara. He's inseparable from Vajradhara. And so for this reason, we prostrate to him. And the second reason is that the Vajradhara is the nature of all the Tathagatas. So this Vajradhara is inseparable from the nature of all the Buddhas in the 10 directions in that respect, and they prostrate to the Guru. And this topic is described more in the 22nd stanza of this. As in this 22nd stanza, it says, the students should not consider the master as different from Vajradhara. So this is described in detail in that passage, so we won't speak about it now. In any case, when we talk about viewing the Guru as a Buddha, when we think of the Guru as being an actual Buddha, and you have the idea that the Guru is an actual Buddha, and having the faith, when we say that it's important to have the faith and devotion to the Guru as being the actual Guru, this is taught in many tantras, not just one or two, but it's taught in many different ways. To give an example, this is from the Guhya Samaja Tantra in the 17th chapter. I don't need to read at all where it says, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Maitreya, he went to prostrate to all the Tathagatas, and he asked a question. What he asked was, Bhagavan, so how do all the Tathagatas and all the Bodhisattvas view a master who has been empowered as Guhya Samaja, the great secret of the Vajra body, speech and mind of all the Gurus? So a master has received the empowerment of Guru Samaja, has been empowered as Guru Samaja. So how do all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas view them? So how do you look at them, if we talk about it colloquial? So this is Maitreya. So how do all the Tathagatas and the Bodhisattvas view a master who's been empowered as Bodhisattva? What's the proper way for them to, how do they pay respect to them, or how do they view them? And then all the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, said, what they said is, so all the Tathagatas in the 10 directions said, son of noble family. All Tathagatas and all Bodhisattvas view them as being both the Bodhicitta Vajra. So the Guru has been empowered as Guru Samaja. The qualified Guru who gives the empowerment of Guru Samaja should be seen as the Bodhicitta Vajra. This is how you should view them. When you say Bodhicitta Vajra, I will explain later below what that means. But the point is you have to see them as being the Bodhicitta Vajra. You should see them as a Bodhicitta, and you shouldn't see them as an ordinary being. And the reason for this is that Bodhicitta Vajra and the Master are not two and cannot be divided into two. The reason is that there's a qualified Guru, the Sikra Vajra, and the Bodhicitta Vajra are inseparable. You can't separate them. They are inseparable, indivisible in essence. And so for this reason, that's why they pay respect to them. Son of noble family, to teach how many, in brief, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who dwell and live and reside in the worlds of the 10 directions, no matter how many there are, come to that Vajra Master in the 3 times. This means morning, midday, and evening. They come in the 3 times, and they offer to the Vajra Master the offerings. All the Tathagatas offer to the Vajra Master. And after they had made the offerings, then they each return to their own Buddha realm. And once they've returned, they say, we are the fathers of all Tathagatas. We are the mothers of all the Buddhas. We are the teachers of all Tathagatas. And so they see the, they say this Guru of the Vajra Master is the father of all Tathagatas. They are the mother of all Tathagatas. They are the teacher of all Tathagatas. And so they praise the Guru in this way, and they recite these words celebrating the Guru. And so at this point, Je Tsongkhapa recites, he explains this by saying, Here, this is in the Gurya Samaja's 70th chapter of this. So this is the person who's giving the empowerment of Gurya Samaja. But this empowerment of Gurya Samaja also can be said that this is the same for other tantras. It doesn't necessarily have to be the one who gives you this Gurya Samaja and that they have these qualities. But the person who gives you the empowerment for other tantras does not have these qualities. As long as someone is giving the empowerments of any tantra, the qualified guru who has these, guru who's giving all these, it can be is someone whom we should think of as a guru or as a Buddha. Bodhisattva is here. It's a synonym for Vajradhara. It's another name for Vajradhara. So in brief, the guru mentioned in the Indian commentary here is you should see this guru who gives you the empowerment of the secret mantras being inseparable from Vajradhara. Now, the explanation that Jesam Japa Khyaltsen gives is says that this stanza is teaching why it's important for us to consider why the guru is so important, why they're so sacred. Now, it's not to mention us all sentient beings. It's unnecessary to mention that we ordinary beings have to pay respect. Even if the guru is an ordinary individual, all the Tathagatas venerate a Vajra master as an ordinary master individual. So it's logical for us to do this. So there's no need to mention if the Vajra master is a noble Buddha, then of course there's no need to say that we need to pay attention to that. But even someone who is an ordinary individual and the Vajra master is someone who is venerated by the Tathagatas. And so this teaches the reason. And he describes the 4 different tantras. When he explains this, he teaches according to 4 different tantras. So he teaches 4 different ways of explaining it according to the 4 different tantras. And the first of these is according to the Kriya Tantra, the Vajrashnisha Tantra. So when he's talking about the master has received the supreme entrada, so what this Vajrashnisha Tantra teaches it in this way. When the Vajra master has received the supreme empowerment, this means the Buddha Dipankara. And the supreme empowerment, what we should understand that is meaning the Vajra-like samadhi. Because they've achieved the Vajra-like samadhi, then these have achieved them. So this should be understood then as the Buddha Dipankara who has achieved that Vajra-like samadhi or the state of Buddhahood. By pleasing this Buddha Dipankara, one achieves the supreme. So actually this Vajra Master Dipankara is the teacher of all the Buddhas in this fortunate eon. When Shakyamuni was the king Shuradatta and the king Gunavat, the Tathagata Dipankara was the Bodhisattva Suchandra. And he came to he was the master who gave Shakyamuni the Bodhisattva. This is when Shakyamuni first aroused bodhicitta. Later, when Dipankara awoke from Buddhahood, he was a teacher for Shakyamuni and all the other Buddhas of the fortunate eon. So, all the Tathagatas of this fortunate eon who have appeared, who will appear, such as Shakyamuni and all the others, in all the worlds in the 10 directions, prostrate to this Dipankara. They all come to them the 3 times, morning, noon, and night, and then they prostrate to them. And likewise, so if that way, there's what need to mention the future students who are ordinary individuals who want to, they should, just as the future students should follow the example of the master of the past. So if all the Buddhas of the past, the Dipangara and all the other masters, uh, just as all the Buddhas of the past, the three times pay homage to the Buddha Dipangara, then it's not necessary to mention that future students who are ordinary individuals should also pay homage. So this is according to the Kriya Tantra Vajroshanisha. Second one is according to the Maya Samvara Tantra. So according to the Maya Samvara Tantra, the Supreme Enlightenment is it means someone who's achieved the Vajra Master empowerment. Like during empowerments, we have the Vajra Master empowerment, right? So here when we say about empowerment, we talk about it according to the Maya Samvara Tantra. This is the supreme empowerment, is the complete Vajra Master empowerment. So receiving it as an ordinary student who's an ordinary individual from a master who teaches beginning ordinary individual. So the master is an ordinary essential, the student is an ordinary sentient being. When that master, who's an ordinary individual, goes to students who are individuals, the initiations such as the Vajra Master and stuff, he gives the initiation and such. Once he's given them, then the student then knows the 10 suchnesses, and they make sure that the master makes sure that the student then knows the 10 suchnesses and so forth. And then they become able to benefit beings by teaching the Dharma and so forth. And so and then they become the Vajra Master. So next we talk about a Vajra Master who has an ordinary individual who has all the qualifications of a Vajra Master. And so the Tathagata is paying homage means, what this means is that Bodhisattvas prostrate to them. So the Tathagata is paying homage means that the Bodhisattvas prostrate to them. So the Tathagatas prostrate to them, say, well, the way that they prostrate is that the Bodhisattvas prostrate to this Vajra Master who is an ordinary individual. So this is the same as the Tathagatas paying homage, and the reason for this is that the Bodhisattvas have on their heads, they have their own, the five Tathagatas, the five families, and so forth as their lord, their families. Most of them have as their crown ornaments the Tathagatas of the five families, and so when the Bodhisattvas prostrate, then the Tathagatas who are in the crowns of the head also are prostrating. So in brief, so the Bodhisattvas dwelling in the world realms of the 10 directions whose heads are adorned with the five families actually prostrate to masters who are ordinary individuals. Then they say, you're a great being, oh, excellent, excellent. Either saying, we're Bodhisattvas, our activity is to benefit sentient beings, and you're doing that activity. You're doing the activity that we Bodhisattvas are supposed to do. And so this is excellent. They say, excellent. So they prostrate to them. And so for this reason, this is the explanation according to Maya Samvara Tantra. So it's kind of the similar doubt as before. So if the Bodhisattvas prostrate, then how is it that if the Bodhisattvas are prostrating, it's fine for them to prostrate to an ordinary individual, a Vajra Master, it's okay. Actually, a Vajrasattva really should prostrate to a great Bodhisattva. It's not like a Bodhisattva should prostrate to a Vajra Master who's an ordinary being. And so in order to do this, the explanation that is given is that the Bodhisattvas prostrate because they are pleased. The beginning of their prostration is when they are pleased. The Bodhisattvas are pleased that they're thinking that they want to bring all sentient beings to Buddhahood, and so they're pleased, and so they begin to prostrate for that reason. So the Bodhisattvas prostrate because the sentient beings have roused bodhicitta. And once they've roused bodhicitta, you need to benefit sentient beings. If you said, I'm just going to benefit beings, or just leave it as an aspiration, that's not enough. You need to actually engage in the activity of benefiting sentient beings. You should not just have aspirational bodhicitta, you also have to have engaged bodhicitta. And you have to arouse engaged bodhicitta and train in the trainings of engaged bodhicitta. And so the Vajramastra themselves is giving the empowerments that ripen. They're doing the teaching Dharma, they're giving consecrations and so forth. They're benefiting so many sentient beings, right? Because they're benefiting so many sentient beings, they're reducing the burden of benefiting sentient beings that the bodhisattvas have to carry. It's really difficult for the bodhisattvas to have a really heavy burden of benefiting sentient beings. There's like this huge burden they're carrying of benefiting all sentient beings. So it's like it's like there's a big load on their back. They have a huge load on their back. And so when that load is made a little bit lighter, by that, these Vajramastras or ordinary individuals, they do whatever they can to benefit beings. Because of doing this, they're decreasing the bodhisattva's load just a little bit. Because it's decreased in the bodhisattvas, then they're like the helpers and perform the activity of bodhisattvas. They're like, because they're so helpful and beneficial. So for that reason, the bodhisattvas prosper to them. Like for an example, if there's like a family where they have two parents, they have a lot of children. When you have so many different children, then like they have, like 10 or 20 children. And they can't raise all of the children on their own. And so they give some to their relatives, to their brothers and sisters, and said, I can't take care of this kid. I can't take this one. So you please help us. And they give each of their other relatives a different child and send them to their relatives to be with them. And then the family members, they raise them with love. And when they raise the children until they grow up. And when they've grown up, then they return the children to their parents. And then the parents said, oh, we've raised your children, they've grown up, and so now we're giving them back to you, they say. When they give them back, then the two parents are just delighted. The parents said, what they say to their relatives is like, you're so kind to help raise our children. And so because of that, they've been able to be raised, and you reduce the burden of my own difficulties. This is really kind of you to do this. And so they're just like from the depths of the heart, they're like remembering them. They say thank you, and they like give them presents and thanksgiving. And then similarly, when the master is an ordinary sentient being, however, they do whatever they can according to their capacities to benefit sentient beings. And so the bodhisattvas, their workload is decreased. The burden is decreased, and they've done a great thing to help sentient beings. And so the bodhisattvas come and say, thank you very much. This is wonderful. That's why you have to do that. When you say thank you, they say they join your palms, say they're worthy of joining palms and worthy of respect. So in any case, this is the understanding of prostrating to Vajramastras who are ordinary individuals. So sometimes we don't understand this, or we think, like, what can this be? What is it? Sometimes we don't understand it properly. It can be kind of uncomfortable. So this is saying, why is ordinary sentient beings who are Vajramastras are worthy of receiving prostration of bodhisattvas? This is it. And so therefore, if the 10th level bodhisattvas prostrate to a qualified Vajramaster who is an ordinary individual, so what need is there to mention that ordinary students should prostrate the Vajra? Of course they should. This is what this is teaching. And so this is the comment, the explanation according to the Maya Samvada Tantra. And then he teaches the explanation from the Guhya Samaja and the Vajrapanjara Tantras together. Jason W. Johnson describes them together. He describes the third and the fourth together. And the way he describes them is that the Gurya Samantra and Vajrapanjara tantras. So Vajrapanjara is the comment is the explanatory tantra for the Vajra tantra. And so it says when we talk about the supreme empowerment, this is the complete four empowerments. And the Vajra master means this is an ordinary individual who's kind of lazy. It's a lazy, ordinary individual. But they're a Vajra master, of course, but they're a little bit lazy. Because they're a little bit lazy. And that's what it's understood as. So the Buddhas are the Tathagatas who dwell in the world realms of the 10 directions. So the masters the Tathagatas who dwell in the world realms of the 10 directions are the Tathagatas of the 3 times. So they first went to their master. And they first, from the very beginning, they achieved the empowerment from their master. Once they received that, they practiced with extreme diligence so that the student awoke to Buddhahood first. Before the master awoke, the student awoke to Buddhahood. So these are the Tathagatas of the 10 directions. So they were really diligent. And so they receive the empowerment to that. Then they're practiced with extreme diligence. They awake to Buddhahood first. The students awake to Buddhahood first. And the Vinaya, excuse me, not the Vinaya. When we were speaking about as explained in talking about the first council, he had memorized all the sutras, but hadn't reached empowerment. There's some students that he taught, and they became arhats. Before the teacher achieved arhatship, then the students did. In the same way, you have the guru who's a little bit lazy. They are unable to achieve Buddhahood. But if you have a qualified student, then because of receiving the empowerment from the Vajra master, and they practice diligent, and the students awaken to Buddhahood first. And so the reason, because the Buddha master is less diligence, they haven't awakened to Buddhahood. But the students who have achieved Buddhahood in order to repay their kindness come from the 10 Buddha realms, the 10 directions, and they actually prostrate to them. The pastors, the Buddhas of the past prostrate to the masters of the past. The Buddhas of the present prostrate to the Buddhas of the masters of the present. So the reason, this is why they say that we're like the father and the guru, the father and the mother of the guru. And so the reason for prostrating is to repay kindness. Once they have achieved Buddhahood, there's really no particular reason to prostrate, but in the past, because they achieved the empowerment from the guru, and because of achieving that empowerment, they practiced the path, and because of practicing the path, they achieved Buddhahood in order to repay the kindness of previously having received the empowerment. They prostrate to the guru. And so this is the reason for this. And so this is just in Java's explanation. Now, the commentary by Tsongkhapa on the 50 verses in the Guru says that in general with the empowerments, there are the causal ripening empowerment, liberating path empowerment, and the resultant empowerment. But here it means the first, the causal ripening empowerment. So we're taking the causal empowerment that ripens. And so the Guru who has received this causal empowerment of ripening, and it's because the reason for this is that we're talking about the student paying respect and homage to the student master who has received the causal empowerment that ripens. And supreme here means that it's pure, an empowerment that was given exactly as was taught in the Tantras. And because of that, then this is like a pure ritual, and because according to the practices taught in the tantras, and so that is why it's called pure. But to talk about the Vajra master, there is a commentary on the Sambuddha Tantra by Jigme Chune Bebas. This is the heads of the grain pithing. There are 40 different instructions, and this is the fifth. This Vajra means bodhicitta, and the one who displays worldly and transcendent conduct because of having that nature is the Vajra master, the guru. So Vajra should be understood as the bodhicitta. And the one who displays the worldly and transcendent path with bodhicitta, the one who teaches the worldly and transcendent paths with that bodhicitta is the Vajra master or guru. And so the Tathagatas dwelling the 10 directions of the East and so forth come to such a master in the 3 periods of the morning, the midday, and the afternoon during these 3 times to prostrate to them. If the Buddhas prostrate to the Vajra master, and that's with such respect, then what need is there mention that other students who are ordinary individuals should pay great respect also? So at this point, he quotes the 17th chapter, this citation from the 17th chapter of Gusamanja that we mentioned before. And he also explains it according to the 10th chapter, the net of illusion, and also according to the Chandrakirti Chilupa Shantipa and Vimalagupta. He takes them there, he says that this is literally the explanation that they give. And so he's following the intent of these, and so I'm following them. So I'm following these, so that the quotation in the Tantras is basically the same as the explanation of Chandrakirti Chilupa and Shantipa and Vimalagupta. However, there's a different explanation of this in the stainless light Kalachakra Tantra explanatory, which is given 2 interpretations, that according to the definitive and the expedient. So there are 2 different explanations of this text. And at that point, so this is talking about an ordinary being who's a student who need to pay respect to a Vajra master and why they need to prostrate. And so it's saying that this is if you combine this with some other explanation, then it's not the right for the context. There are many different ways of explaining each of the words of the Tantra, so I don't think there's any contemporary. In any case, when you talk about the supreme, basically, Tsongkhapa is saying that the 2 interpretations, definitive and expedient, given in the stainless light commentary on the Kalachakra. The reason why is that there are 2 different explanations in this. There's the expedient, the definitive meaning, and the expedient meaning. And the interpretation according to the definitive explanation is that supreme empowerment means the supreme Vajra masters, is the Buddha Vajrasattva, who has received the manifest element, the supreme of the 4 empowerments, the unchanging bliss of Mahamudra. And so the Vajra master who has achieved this supreme of the 4 empowerments, the unchanging bliss of Mahamudra, is Buddha Shakyamuni. So Buddha Shakyamuni is the supreme master. Hence the bodhisattvas of the 10 directions prostrate to him the 3 times. And at that time, the bodhisattvas of the 3 times prostrate to them. And when they're prostrating the 3 times, how this becomes the Tathagatas prostrating, it's because the aggregates of the bodhisattvas are called the Tathagatas. The 5 aggregates become the 5 Tathagatas. There's this way of explaining that, of calling each of the 5 aggregates by one of the 5 Tathagatas, or because the Tathagatas sit on their crowns as the lords of their families. When the bodhisattvas prostrate to the Buddha Shakyamuni, then the Tathagatas on the crowns of their heads, as well as the uh, five aggregates also are prostrating to the Buddhas. And so for this reason, it can be explained in this fashion. The the Tathagata prostrating to the master who has achieved supreme empowerment is this way. In any case, this expedient meaning is that the supreme empowerment is the supreme of the form, but it's the unchanging bliss of Mahamudra. So this is taking this as achieving this actual empowerment, this actually the highest empowerment. Now, in order to explain this according to reach the expedient meaning, the student's body is called the world rooms of the 10 directions, and likewise, the five, and also their five aggregates are called by the names of the five Tathagatas. And so this is in way to show that the students prostrate to the guru who gave them gives them the empowerment. And so in this way, this verse can be also explained in this manner. So in any ways, this can be talked about in terms of the definitive meaning and the expedient meaning. And the definitive meaning means that the guru has achieved the guru has achieved the actual fourth empowerment, the unchanging bliss of Mahamudra. And the expedient meaning is talking about Vajra master has achieved who is the Vajra master. And here there's a commentary by Mipam Rinpoche on the great commentary on the Kala Chakra. And here there's something that he said that's a really important point. So there are these people who lack even the transmission of the empowerment. They forget about actually receiving empowerment. They don't even have the transmission of that. And they're really greedy for the Samaya substances, and they want a lot of attachment to, and their greed for material things. They think that they give the empowerment, they'll get a lot of pecha. So they say that they're like a Vajra master, and they pretend to be a Vajra master, and they pour the water from the vase onto people's heads. And so there's no certainty that anyone who can pour water on someone's head is an actual bodhicitta. The basic point is it's putting the vase on someone's head is just not what makes you a guru. And there's no certainty that you achieve the prostrator from the Buddhas. When you say that the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas are going to give prostration, and when you talk about who is going to receive the prostration, you need a qualified Vajra master, one who has the qualifications taught in the tantras. So if you have a qualified guru with all those qualifications, then they are someone who is worthy of, should be considered worthy of receiving the prostrations from all of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas at the 3 times. It's not just anyone who can say that they're a Vajra master and place a vase on everyone's head. And another thing that Mipam Rinpoche says, in this time of thick tension, there are many fake gurus, many charlatans. They don't think about the beings, they don't think about sentient beings, they don't think about teachings, and they try to deceive many sentient beings. They don't deceive foolish the students who are not that clever, they don't really know what's going on. They want to fool many of these students. There are a lot of these charlatans who are deceitful. And because of this, whether the beginning, you have to determine whether the guru is qualified or not. You have to, once you've been introduced to whether the guru is qualified and you've recognized them as such, and then you follow them. It's not just say that anyone who is a guru and say that's not something that you don't listen to everything that anyone say. You don't, if you believe that anyone who says they're a guru think of that their words are the words of the Buddha, then you get to see that you must be very careful about. So this is a really, so just above we described that the guru is so important, but later when we look at it, when you talk about a guru, the guru that we should consider to be so important is not just anyone who's given the name Lama. Not everyone that is known around the world as being a great Lama. It's something you have to look with your own intelligence. You sort of have to get some knowledge about them to see are they a guru or not. you need to really hone your understanding and you get to an appropriate level of understanding. That is what we mean as a guru. It's not that you should just follow. It's not like that with everyone who you should call. It's not you should follow anyone who calls themselves a guru. So next, Guru Tsongkhapa says that this means that the Buddha is about a qualified guru. This says, and it talked about, according to that, he gives a quotation from the Sri Paramartha Seva, the Ultimate Service Tantra. But there's also Atisha's compendium of the Sutras. This is not connected with the Vajrayana. This is a text that compiles a text from many. I think this is Atisha's compendium of the sutras. It gathers quotations from many sutras, and so they call this is the Atisha compendium of the sutras. And in this, there's this quoted from the Sutra, the Heap of Jewels, and what it says in the Sutra of the Heaps of Jewels. The Buddha says to Ananda, what he said to Ananda, if a bodhisattva, there's a bodhisattva, they're actually a bodhisattva, but they're riding in a carriage and enjoying and delighting in 5 sensory pleasures. They're a bodhisattva, but in the way they look, is they're sitting in a carriage and they're enjoying all these different sensory pleasures, form, sound, scent, taste, and touch, and so forth, and enjoying themselves. So eating the nice food and wearing beautiful clothes and surrounded by many beautiful people and enjoying these 5 sensory pleasures. So the image is, the way it looks is that they're enjoying the 5 sensory pleasures. But in actuality, they're bodhisattva. And they're going in this carriage. And as they're going in the carriage, and as they're going in the carriage, you have to need a driver for the carriage, right? There has to be a driver in the carriage. Someone has to be driving the carriage, or someone who's driving the horse, who's, telling the horse to go. If there's no driver, the carriage is not going to go. There's no other driver for the carriage, then Ananda, then you listen. Then the Tathagata will place that bodhisattva's carriage on their head and carry it. Basically, if you understand it, if you understand what we mean by that bodhisattva's carriage, when you don't find any other khandha, then the Buddha themselves will be the driver of the carriage. And so this way, what this is showing us is that if you have an actual benefit bodhisattva who benefits sentient beings, their image might look like they're an ordinary sentient being or so forth, but in actuality, if they're a bodhisattva, then if they don't have a driver for the carriage, then the Buddha will actually come and drive the carriage for them. This is basically what it's saying. So this is what he says. So that it's the same logic or the same reason according to Tsongkhapa's commentary. So I think that's basically it for today. Thank you.